Okay, well, I hope this is recording. Today I'm going to talk about confined spaces, which is 1910.146, and specifically I'm going to be talking about parts B and C, which are the general definitions and general requirements. The first part, 1910.46, is the definitions. We're going to go over a few different definitions, so everything's a little more clear when I start explaining the actual general requirements. First of all, you have a confined space, and a confined space is something that is large enough and so configured that an employee can bodily enter and perform assigned work, has limited or restricted means of entry or exit, and is not designed for continuous employee occupancy. As you can see by the three pictures below, these are all examples of a confined space. Now, particularly for this presentation, and mainly when we talk about confined spaces, what is important are permit required confined spaces. Now, what differs a permit required confined space versus a confined space is a confined space is just an area that is not really meant to be worked in. It is small, hard to get into. A permit required confined space has the following criteria, and that is that it contains or has the potential to contain hazardous atmosphere, contains a material that has the potential for engulfing an entrant, an internal configuration such that an entrant would be trapped or asphyxiated by inwardly converging walls or by floors which slopes downward and tapers to a small cross section, and then finally anything other than what is mentioned before that could cause serious safety or health hazards. Now, the first one that was mentioned was a hazardous atmosphere. That's the first part that makes a permit required confined space. So what is a hazardous atmosphere? So it can be a number of different things. It can be a flammable gas or mist in the excess of 10% of its lower flammability limit, or LFL. An airborne combustible dust at a concentration that meets or exceeds its LFL. Atmospheric oxygen concentration that's below 19.5 and above 23.5, which are important numbers to remember. And anything that contains a chemical that has a PEL that is in subpart Z. So you want to monitor those and make sure that none of the PELs are actually being going over your PEL, the ones that are listed in subpart C. And like the last part, anything else that's not covered in the first four parts that could cause immediately dangerous health to life or health is considered a hazardous atmosphere. So engulfment, that was number 2 on the list of things for a permit required confined space, and that is the surrounding and effective capture of a person by liquid or finely divided solid substance that can be aspirated to cause death by filling or plugging the respiratory system, or can cause strangulation, constriction, or crushing by its own force. Some examples could be sand, grain, water, things of those nature. Authorized entrant is an employee who is authorized by the employer to enter a permit space. Now, who gives this person the authorization, you may ask? Well, that is the entry supervisor. He is the person, he or she is the person responsible for determining if acceptable entry conditions are present at a permit space where entry is planned. They are also for authorizing entry and overseeing entry operations, and for terminating entry when it is required. So, what is needed to get into this confined space, this permit required confined space, other than the authorization of the entry supervisor? Well, you need an entry permit, the written or printed document that is printed by the employer to allow and control entry into the permit space. And then also, say you were doing some kind of task in there, such as welding, riveting, burning, cutting, and heating, something that could provide a source of ignition, you need a hot work permit, and this is the same process as going through an entry permit. And another point to mention is an IDLH, which is immediately dangerous to life or death. which is any condition that poses an immediate or delayed threat to life, or that could cause adverse health effects, or that would interfere with an individual's ability to escape unaided from a permitted area. Alright, so those were the definitions. Those were some things we had to get by. Next, we're going to go on to the general requirements, which is Part C of 1910-146. So the first part is, the employer shall evaluate the workplace and determine if any spaces are permit required confined spaces. This is important to figure out which areas in your facility need to be monitored. If the workplace contains permit spaces, the employer shall inform exposed employees by posting signs like the ones that you see placed around the slide where I can make them fit. If the employer decides that the employees will not enter permit spaces, the employer shall take effective measures to prevent employees from entering the permit spaces, such as barriers, guardrails, locks to keep people out of latches and things like that. So next, permit space programs. We're going to go into this a little bit here, and we're going to go on to it later more. But if an employer decides that employees will enter permit spaces, the employer shall develop and implement a written permit space program that complies with this section. And it will be just available for inspection by employees and their authorized representatives. I will not be getting into the details of what is required for a permit space program, because that is actually part of Section D of this OSHA part, and so I only cover B and C. So I touch on it, but not much. Next part is, any conditions making it unsafe to remove an entrance. Any conditions making it unsafe to remove an entrance cover shall be eliminated before the cover is removed. So you got to clear any hazards that may be a harm to someone if they open the hatch before they open it. When the entrance covers are removed, the opening shall be promptly guarded by a railing, temporary cover, or other temporary barrier that will prevent an accidental fall through the opening, and that will protect each employee working in the space from foreign objects entering the space. So you pretty much want to cover the holes that you make. So you're going into a confined space, you got to check the area. So there's atmospheric testing, which you heard about a little bit earlier. You got to test it. So before an employee enters the space, the internal atmosphere must be tested by a calibrated direct reading instrument for, first, oxygen content, second, flammable gases and vapors, and third, potential toxic air contaminants. It has to be in that specific order. Also, any employee who enters the space or that employee's authorized representative shall be provided an opportunity to observe the pre-entry testing required by this paragraph. There may be no hazardous atmosphere within the space whenever any employee is inside the space. And here in this little picture, you can see this guy sticking one of those little meters. If you're in the IH class, you saw we got to handle these, but he's testing the atmospheric conditions inside that confined space. So air ventilation is very crucial for confined spaces. It can get hazardous materials out, hazardous gases and such out. So an employee may not enter the space until the forced air ventilation has eliminated any hazardous atmosphere. That is important. The air forced ventilation shall be directed as to ventilate the immediate areas where an employee is or present within the space, and shall continue until all employees have left the space. So you want to clear the area out completely. The air supply has to be from a clean air source. I know that is probably seems like common sense. You don't want to suck dirty air into where you're going, but that needs to be mentioned. So that was made a mistake somewhere if OSHA is recognizing it. The atmosphere also within the space shall be periodically tested afterwards to make sure that the air ventilation is preventing the accumulation of hazardous materials in the atmosphere. So just if hazardous materials are detected while people are in a confined space, each employee shall leave immediately. That is the first task. Everyone gets out. The space shall be evaluated to determine how and where the hazardous atmosphere developed. And then measures shall be implemented to protect employees from the hazardous atmosphere before they go back in. So air ventilation and stuff along those lines. Maybe PPE, which we all know PPE is the last one we want to use. So other actions need to be taken to make this confined space safer to operate in. The employer shall verify that the space is safe for entry and that the pre-entry measures have been taken through a written certification that contains the date, location of space, and the signature of the person. This just to make sure that there's someone to be held responsible, that someone checked this area to make sure it's safe and made sure that whatever levels are in there are safe for someone to go into, or if it's being fixed, that the problems were fixed and the space is now safe to go into. Next part is about contracted workers. There's a big whole section that pretty much just repeated itself about 2 or 3 times through sections, and the main points that just to know are: if you hire contractors, they must be informed of all the potential hazards in the permitted space and all your confined spaces and stuff. If they have to go in there, or their people have to go in there, they must be educated and trained on the confined spaces particular to your facility or wherever you're working. You just want to make people aware of what they're dealing with and what's going on. Also, contractors, your hired contractors and whoever, so pretty much the bosses and the contractors, they must coordinate their actions between each other to make sure that everyone is following the same rules, guidelines, and procedures for their permit entry program and how they enter these permitted spaces. So in conclusion, confined spaces are going to be found in a number of different industries. We've all probably actually been in a confined space without even knowing it, but some things that need to be known and the highlights are: authorization is needed before entering a permit required confined space. The things that make it a permit required confined space are the atmospheric hazards mainly, and then also the means of entry and how to get out. For atmospheric hazards, you're going to want to monitor for the oxygen level first, the flammability level for any flammable gases or vapors or mists, and then you want to go on to any toxic chemicals or toxic things that could cause harm. When you're doing atmospheric testing, like I said, you want to test for those 3 things, and you want to do it periodically to make sure that nothing is building up inside of the confined space. Air ventilation is a great way and is a necessity to eliminate hazards a lot of the time from accumulations of different gases and vapors. So air ventilation is a must, and it must come from a clean air source. And then finally, contracted workers are needed. They need to be informed about all the potential hazards that arise from the confined spaces in your facility or in your area, and the contractors need to work with each other to make sure that their workers are safe. And that is the end. Thank you.